Ahoy, Buccaneers and Buccarinas. My name is Captain Nogistone, and it's been a while. I know, I'm not in my usual piratey getup. I'm got a lot of IRL stuff that I'm dealing with at the moment, but that's why the change a little bit. Why the camera is currently my webcam on top of my computer as opposed to my normal camera, which is a little higher quality most of the time. But I figured I'd put out an update and be like, hey, what's up? And most importantly of all, talk about what's going on with Stormwind, because that seems to be the more important thing at the moment. So, yeah, so Hearthstone. Hearthstone's in a weird kind of spot at the moment because we're having to deal with the immediate release of United and Stormwind. And two problems have very quickly arisen from this. And they are Quest Mage and Quest Warlock. So here's the thing about these two decks. Quest Mage is, if you don't know about what Quest Mage does, it's casting a Fire, Frost, Arcane spell, and then you get to draw a spell, then you get to discover a spell, and then you get Arcanist Dawn Grasp, which gives you a permanent +3 spell damage for the rest of the game. Okay, not too shabby, and it's a 3-part kind of quest, so it's a little, interesting to kind of pick up on that. However, the quest is remarkably easy to do, especially if your opponent plays any kind of minions, because most of the Quest Mage decks I've seen, and the ones that I've been trying out even, is no spells, or excuse me, no minions, rather. So no minion mage is kind of the dominant way of playing Quest Mage at the moment. And that tends to rely on a little bit the minions, specifically for the frost spells that get played in that deck. But then once you do, you just burn your opponent down with Apexis Blast, Fireballs, Ignite, the new Ignite card, and Refreshing Spring Water becomes, again, a really, really good card in the deck. So there's no surprises there, especially when you get Incanter's Flow going on. So hey, we have issues still. Then there's Questlock, which is arguably the more egregious between the two, and I think probably the one that a lot of people are looking at saying we need to address this. Because Questlock is simple enough in and of itself. You take 6 damage, then 7 damage, then 8 damage for each part of the quest, and then you get a Lifesteal deal 3, Lifesteal deal 3, and then you get Tamsin as the final reward, who, for the rest of the game, makes it so that any damage you take during your turn is inflicted to your opponent instead. Which includes a lot of different things for Warlock. So that's things like Backfire, that's things like the Hero Power, that's things for anything that Stealer of Souls affects, Fatigue, and there have been a lot of recent Wombo combos and giant burst powers that specifically make up the finishing blow in that deck. Other decks I've seen that might create some problems down the line, but aren't as prevalent right now, include like Quest Druid and Quest Demon Hunter a little bit. Those are the other two decks I've seen that are very prominently, impactful on the current meta, but again, they're a little bit more on the kind of a combo-y side, and the Quest Demon Hunter seems to be flexible enough that it's it could be any different kind of variants. The Quest Druid is more of just using Mark of the Spike Shell on Guff the Tough, which is the final part of that quest, and that quest is pretty easy to achieve as well, but I think most people would agree that right now the biggest problems are Quest Mage and Quest Warlock, so I think it's best to address those two decks first and foremost. So, what can we do to fix the current problem in Hearthstone, where we have Mage Stone and or Warlock Stone, Spellcaster Stone, except for, if you're a priest, in which case you don't exist in this meta currently. Surprisingly, Priest Quest, which I think a lot of people might have looked at and been like, wow, that's a crazy cool quest, that's going to be super impactful, it's going to be a big control deck, and it's kind of non-existent right now, surprisingly. So, what can we do about Quest Mage and Quest Warlock? So, there's a couple of ways I think that we can go about changing these cards, or changing these decks, such that, addressing some of the big problem cards in these decks to actually fix the major issues that are kind of going forward right now. So, One is that you address the quest lines, right? And that's a little easier for Quest Mage than it is for, like, Quest Warlock. With Quest Warlock, you are having to take 6th and 7th and 8 damage, which in total is about 21 damage. However, you also have to consider you're healing 6 of that damage back through the first 2 parts of the quest. You're getting that health resource back. So effectively, you're only paying half your life to effectively make any damage you then take hit your opponent instead. So that's kind of the way to think about this. You're really only losing 15 health through your self-damage cards before you can blast away at your opponent. So one of the ways you can address that, of course, is obvious. Boost the damage up. Make it so that you're a little closer to 30 rather than 15. And I know that ends up into some very scary territory, and I understand why they did it to more like half your health, under the assumption that you would be dealing with these aggressive decks, these aggressive playstyles. And certainly to a degree you are, but you've also got some anti-aggro tools included in Stormwind. One of the big ones is the Baker, who gives you health based on your hand size. So, it's something that you could push the envelope a little bit on Quest Warlock by pushing back against some of the quest requirements and making it more difficult, or at the very least, scarier for you to actually complete the quest in any sort of reasonable span of time. With Quest Mage, I think the easiest thing is to actually just push probably the last step to require 2 fire spells, 2 frost spells, 2 arcane spells. It doesn't immediately, because the thing about the Quest Mage deck is that there are frost and fire spells at 0 mana. You know, Flurry and I believe it's Hot Streak are the 2 cards that come to mind. And that is such an easy thing then to pull off when you can just cast free copies and then you can complete a quest, you know, a portion of the quest very easily with that in mind. And then you don't have, like, then you have this bigger issue of just kind of like dealing, you know, with the next part of the quest, but it's also like you've completed one part easily, so you get to draw a spell. That could be your next fire, your next frost. Arcane is so easy to take care of, like, it doesn't even matter. So even if you bump up the requirements for Arcane to, like, you know, instead of 1 Arcane spell, you do 2 Arcane spells, well, it's like, it doesn't matter, because literally there's so many Arcane spells that are so good enough to play. Fire spells, very easy to get through. Frost spells, it becomes a little trickier. So if you bump up the requirements to 2 fire, 2 frost, 2 arcane for at the very least the last step, you don't need to go, I don't think it needs to go as excessive as going like 2 fire, 2 frost, 2 arcane in the middle step, 3 fire, 3 frost, 3 arcane in the last step. But I think if you just require for the, you know, the final step to at least require 2 fire, 2 arcane, that slows the pace of that deck down significantly, such that it gives people kind of a chance to set up, do their thing, and, you know, helps kind of mitigate that late game, you know, burn, brush down, blast that Mage is kind of notorious for at this point, or at least Quest Mage is. So those are a couple of ideas with regards to addressing the quests. The other big idea is to address some of the more problematic cards in those decks that help achieve those quests faster, or help kind of incentivize the finish off. So, like, let's talk about Quest Mage for a sec. Big cards, I think, to suspect test right now are going to be like Ignite. Ignite, for what it does and what it is capable of doing, and the fact that you can discount it so easily with Incanter's Flow, which is the other card I want to probably talk about with regards to Quest Mage, it's something that can be very easily kind of, you know, manipulated in such a way that you can just burn down your opponent so easily with Ignite. And it's a big part of the Fire Mage deck too, so, I mean, that's not necessarily as prevalent right now, I think, as Quest Mage, but that still presents its own issues of sorts. Maybe not as tremendous as in the Quest Mage deck, but it is its own issue. So Ignite might be a little bit of a suspect at this point in time, being one of the more prominent fire spells. Flurry, being kind of the bigger frost spell, is, you know, between the 2 frost spells that really see play, like Flurry. I think it's Flurry, Brain Freeze, which probably won't get touched, and Ice Barrier, which, yeah, free frost spell that doesn't require any minions to play. That's a pretty good one right there, so... but I would say probably some of the easiest things are probably to look at are Flurry, Ignite, Incanter's Flow, and Refreshing Spring Water. Because again, Refreshing Spring Water provides some of that late game burst, especially after, if you get it for like 3 or 4 mana because you've Incanter's Flowed it, then, you know, you're pretty much just cycling through your deck, and blasting down your opponent with like 2 mana fireballs, 2 mana, like 3 mana Apexis blasts, you know, 0 mana ignites that deal 6 damage, right? So that's the big issue that kind of, you know, is having to be tackled now with Quest Mage, is that you just have these easy discounts with Incanter's Flow, and then you have this big burst down potential, this giant amount of damage that can come from Ignite, and you have an easy way of accessing different parts of the quest with Flurry. So one of the things I think that can help with that is you bump Flurry up to 1. As an example, because then it's not a free, you know, it's not a freebie frost spell, and now it becomes, it's like, it's got a cost to it, and it's a minor change. I don't think it's something that would severely hinder the deck necessarily, but it is something that would be like, okay, now they have to kind of consider, you know, is the Flurry play worth it if it also is going to cost them their Ignite play, or their Arcane play, you know, it kind of, again, mitigates a little bit of the pace of that deck. You could also bump Incanter's Flow's mana cost up a little bit. You could make it 3 mana, you could make it 4 mana if you really want to do. I think Ignite could actually go all the way up to 4 mana if you really wanted to. But again, in the case of Incanter's Flow, bumping it up by a mana is just to kind of slow the pace of the deck down a little bit, prevent you from immediately having that big, you know, cost reduction for the rest of your deck. Ignite going up to like 3 or 4 mana would, again, just kind of mitigate that late bit. It would still require like 2 Incanter's Flows to be as good as it is right now, and that's its own thing. And it also, again, you're preventing that burst down. Refreshing Spring Water is tough to deal with because, again, we already addressed this card in the previous expansion and that whole bit, and it's doing the same stuff again, except it's even more prevalent right now, as if it wasn't prevalent before, because now we're in a meta that's like, okay, you either have to blast down your opponent ASAP, you know, burn them ASAP, which now is easier to do with Quest Mage because you get +3 to all your spell damage. So now it's easier than ever to burst down your opponent, or you end up getting burst down yourself. So Refreshing Spring Water might have to get another look at. Might have to be going back up to like 6 mana, or maybe you drop it back down to 4, but then you only refresh 1 mana crystal for each spell drawn. Not as refreshing as it used to be, and kind of a little bit against the spirit of the card, which is why I feel like it's better to do it to like 6 mana, for instance. Just really kind of slow the pace of this deck down, push the cost values up a little bit, and that may make Quest Mage more open up a little space, so it's not as dominant, essentially. As for Questlock, there's unfortunately not a lot you can do as far as the mana costs, and pretty much the biggest reason is because the only card that needs to be changed is Stealer of Souls. Stealer of Souls was already a problem, and we've already known Stealer of Souls is a problem because it got banned in Wild immediately, because of some of the combos that would be immediately prevalent with things like Plot Twist, Mal'Ganis, Violet, Illusionist, you know, making your hero immune, and then you don't have to pay any life. Then you play Stealer of Souls, and then you just draw cards, and you draw cards, and you know, use Plot Twist. You draw all these cards, and none of them cost anything because you're immune. They're all like cost health instead of mana, but your hero's immune, so you don't pay for anything. So we already knew Stealer of Souls was kind of broken in some way. It was really only a matter of time before it was broken here in Standard, frankly, and that's where we're running into this major issue right now with Stealer of Souls, where it is, in particular, the big problem I find with Stealer of Souls right now is that it's pushing for this massive burst blast right at the end of the game. It's like you play, you know, Blightborn Tamsin as your big quest reward, and then you have Stealer of Souls. You draw, you know, a bunch of cards with either Backfire, your hero power, you know, I think what the other one is, Hand of Gul'dan, and you just draw a bunch of cards with that, and it doesn't matter how many cards you draw and how much life you have to pay at that point, because guess what? Your opponent's the one paying all the life now because you played Tamsin, so it's so easy to just blow your opponent out of the water with these high cost cards that now cost your opponent the life, because that's how Tamsin works in that case. So I think the best and probably the easiest change you can do, make Stealer of Souls only affect the first card drawn each turn. That's it. You change the effect text to just the first card. You still keep the general spirit of the card alive, where it's like, oh, well, yeah, you draw a card, it'll cost health instead of mana. But you limit that burst potential. And then you also address kind of the issue in Wild, where it's like, oh, it could just do all these crazy, ridiculous combos, which, I mean, Wild is for that kind of thing anyway. But Stealer of Souls has never been banned. There's never been a card banned for the potential it has in Wild. Stealer of Souls right now is the only card that's been banned in Wild. So if you change this card, I think you will address the standard problem with Quest Warlock, where you have that massive blast burst down of damage within the late game right there after the Tamsin comes down. And you also address the Wild problem where you're worried about, like, the heroes being immune, plot twist coming in, and it's like, oh, it's like you get a free hand of, like, explosive potential, right? So Stealer of Souls, make it just be the first card drawn, and I think you fix the problems with everything else. Like, you don't have to adjust the cost of cards, you don't have to push back, like, Tamsin Rome, you don't have to push back Ruined Mithril Rod, you don't have to touch, like, Unstable Shadow Blast, you don't have to touch any of these other cards, because now you fixed the biggest problem with the deck, which was Stealer of Souls, which provides that extreme burst damage, which, if I'm not mistaken, and correct me if I'm wrong on this one, I don't believe Warlock should have that burst down potential, right? That's what Hunter Quest is for. But yeah, I think that's kind of where we're at right now. As far as those two major decks, like I said, we do have other decks that are showing up in the format that are prominent and could potentially be problems if these two decks get nerfed down a little bit. Then those decks may rise up and become, like, higher tier threats. So I'm looking right now at Quest Druid, maybe Quest Hunter a little bit. And that's maybe some Quest Demon Hunter stuff. Maybe a little bit. Just kind of, you know, figuring there's some stuff. There is some potential for these different kind of plays, these different decks to kind of, like, possibly usurp kind of the early Mage Quest, Warlock Quest dominated meta right now. Meta, and I should say meta is very loose because this is still very much the early, like, this is literally, like, I think this is the second, third day that the set has been out, so it's very early on, but I would say right now Mage Quest and Questlock are the two big problem decks right now at the moment. If only because they have been dominant immediately right off the bat, and there's not a whole lot of... The problem with dealing with these decks right now is there's not a whole lot of interactiveness to them. There's not a whole lot of, like... There's nothing really you can do to quickly stop them unless you're playing ridiculously aggressive. Like, super, super aggressive. And if you just kind of play into them, they just do their thing and then they win, right? So, that's kind of where we're at, I think, in terms of dealing with these decks. So, I don't know, if you guys have any thoughts as to, you know, what's going on in the early days here in Stormwind, feel free to let me know down in the comments, and, you know, I'll probably catch you in the next video, whenever I decide that is going to be. So until then, guys, take it easy, and I hope you have a good one.